for my next experiment, ladies and gentlemen.
The original Snow White took 4 long, rough years to develop. Budgeted at $250,000, the film ballooned to $1.5 million. This was in 1937. Walt Disney had to mortgage his house to keep production going. Many in the media called it Disney's folly and predicted it would bankrupt the studio. It was the first ever full-length animated movie, and it being the first one, numerous brand new animation techniques had to be developed. Of the 750 artists, many working nights and weekends, some would work on a single scene for months to get it right. According to Disney's biography, teams of people, including the man himself, would spend weeks working on individual gags that would sometimes only take up a couple seconds of screen time. But when all was said and done, the film premiered on December 21st, 1937 in Los Angeles, California. When the standing ovations died down, Walt Disney knew he was on to something. In its initial release on a budget of $1.5 million, which is $13 million adjusted for inflation, Snow White made $8 million in 1937, or $165 million. With re-releases and adjusted for inflation, the original Snow White has made $2.2 billion. It was by far the highest-grossing movie of all time at the time, even with almost no worldwide release. It saved the Walt Disney Company and launched one of the most successful brands in history, creating an empire of movies, toys, parks, and intellectual property that consumed the biggest properties in entertainment, and went on to finalize their destruction on March 21st, 2025. So as we talk about this, we are going to intersperse some of my first-time reactions to when I first watched this movie. But we will start with Snow White 2025, then talk about what makes the original Snow White 1937 so amazing, and then go on into what the hell is going on with Disney and what the future looks like for the company. So first, the Snow White 2025, it misses everything that made the original story resonate, that made the original movie meaningful, that enchanted people for decades, and in its place, made a paean to narcissism and a call to selfish entitlement over selfless maturity. The entire DNA of the movie and its production are counter to everything the original stood for. From characters to cinematography to music, to plot choices to dialogue, everything misses the point. However, in order to understand just how completely the stewards of Disney have screwed up, we need to understand the original.
Ladies and gentlemen, by way of introduction, this is a film about trickery.
As I said before, Snow White, the original, came out in 1937. This was amidst the rise of Charlie Chaplin, but prior to his invasion of Poland. It was a few years after a Great Depression and a couple years before the world would be torn apart for a second time in the same century. So people needed some relief. Now, Snow White is an innocent girl. She's naive and sincere, and the story of Snow White is her coming to terms with the threat of the world. You're just gonna make out with a bird right in front of him? What a slutty bird! Her evil stepmother is representative of the devouring mother archetype. In the original story, it's actually her real mother, her actual mother. But they changed it for purposes of the movie to her stepmother, because they thought it was a little too scary for kids. Now, the thing to understand, the thing that's been lost in filmmaking for a while now, is that the storytelling in fairy tales and early Disney movies is very psychologically complex and robust. So the devouring mother archetype is a mother that wants everything to be about her, everything to serve her narcissism, including her children. That's what's being represented in the movie of Snow White, and what was being represented in the original story. So, as we talked about, the threat is coming from inside the house. Snow White is thrust into the real world where threats come from everywhere.
Can you fly?
Gee, that dude is scary looking. She's spared by the huntsman, flees into the forest, and even logs are coming alive. to attack her. This is a hyperbolic representation of what's threatening in the world. The world's terrifying. But then as her initial fear starts to dissipate, then she notices that nature is starting to guide her, represented by the animals that come out of the forest. Nature brings her to a home in disorder. When she gets there, she surmises that tiny men, or men who haven't grown up, live there. And what they need is for her to bring order to the home. One of the most fundamental archetypal ideas is the idea of a woman who civilizes monstrous men. Aiding and abetting and breaking and entering, or at least trespass, to arrest every one of these little things. Now, it's explicitly stated that the dwarfs have no mother, so it's up to Snow White to civilize the brutish and immature men. And one thing that you'll notice is that both of them whistle while they work.
Just whistle while you work.
And the idea is the complementarity of the roles of men and women. And one thing you see that emphasizes this idea is a reflection. In Snow White, when she sings into the well, she gets an echo.
I'm wishing for the one I love.
And then when the dwarfs are working in the mine, they also get an echo.
In a mine, where a man...
Both parties are speaking out to the world and getting an answer. It would be pretty crazy to find like 30 animals in your house when you got home. Now, when the little men return from work, it's played as a joke, but the men are timid and afraid. These aren't heroes or conquerors. They haven't realized everything that they are because they don't have the complementary role that they need. And Snow White is looking for a role in the real world that provides comfort and protection. The healthy roles that we play are not oppressive, they are guides with centuries of legacy. She went to bed with something cooking? What kind of a maniac does that? What happens next? She's making dinner and instructs them to wash. She doesn't beg or request for them to wash. In the home, she has authority. It is her domain to create an orderly home. This is what she's learning about her role in the world. Then, after the longest dance party in history, it's the only part that drives me a little crazy. They've got this stubby rave going on for just what seems like hours and hours. The home is clean, and after a successful day, they all get to rest. The next day, the dwarfs reach first base. Try to be macho. And they each warn her repeatedly about the danger of the queen and dangers in the world. But she still needs real protection. I don't trust those vultures. I'm gonna go out on a limb here. So as I said before, the queen is the devouring mother. She wants the attention, but her younger daughter receives it. Women are supposed to transition from narcissist to nurturer. When they have not progressed emotionally, they will demand that everything cater to their emotional validation. All of it is about her emotional narcissism. This is again emphasized by the idea of her devouring the potion. That is a concoction of a number of outlandish things that are meant to serve her narcissism. How dare you use an apple for ill? What woman would ever do... Oh. Then we get the apple. The apple, of course, is symbolic of original sin. In the Garden of Eden, Eve ate the apple, and in the fallen world that resulted, Adam had to protect her. Just as an aside, she's also taking dating advice from an old, lonely hag at this point. Miserable women don't want women to be happy. Now, by this point in the story, given everything that she's gone through, she understands her role in the world. Her eating the apple and falling into a death-like sleep is representative of the fact that she is still vulnerable, and now she's in this state of hyperbolic passivity. Until she is awakened by flowering in her role as a wife and mother and receiving the complementarity that people need in the world. Now, in the original story, the queen's death is actually very violent. She's invited to their wedding and shows up out of curiosity and is forced to dance to death in these burning iron shoes. In the cartoon, she's being pursued by the dwarfs and the animals and falls from a ledge after a lightning bolt hits the rock. So it's more like nature correcting the world. It actually makes a little bit more sense than the original fairy tale. Imagine somebody calling this situation into the police. It's like, okay, hear me out. So is this girl. She ate an apple. It was like 5 deer and 20 squirrels and 7 short people, I think they're dwarfs, that are chasing this old lady. Thereafter, Snow White says goodbye to the immature little men who helped her along her way, and she lives happily ever after with the perfect complementarity of the man and the woman. Now, holy mother, do you see all the complexity that was built into this story, that was based on a fairy tale from the Grimm's fairy tales, that had roots in antiquity and then was refined over the course of 4 years and under the threat of the loss of the entire company to make something that would be memorable and great and launch the world in a whole new era of entertainment. And not just entertainment, but really understanding who we are and where we fit in the world. It is brilliant and gorgeous, it's so nice to look at, and stands the test of time with the greatest stories in history. Now, in the remake, the live-action remake of Snow White starring Rachel Zegler, it's a completely different story. Walt Disney and his animators sincerely wanted to tell great stories. The economics were a necessity for being able to do that. That's why they created some of the most iconic and moving stories ever made. And that's why the Disney of today is dead. It's like if a toddler rewrote Citizen Kane and made it into a sledding competition. Modern Disney have been milking the legacy of sincerity for decades, peddling generic propaganda with all the thought and care of a guy making a donation. Disney is dead. The entire executive team needs to go, the entire staff need to be replaced, they need to start from zero and tell timeless stories again, not the timely non-stories that promptly decay minutes after release. I personally think we need a new source of magic for a new century and a new era of filmmaking and entertainment. We'll see if anyone steps into the breach. That was Snow White. If you want to see a full breakdown of the remake, let me know. Subscribe if you haven't, and if you made it this far, you are top 10% of humans in the world. See you on the next one.